Hello, and welcome back to the Queen City Guitar Shop. So the last time that I was building a guitar, I was making videos, and I started those videos almost at the beginning of the guitar, but not quite at the beginning. And that little gap from where I started and where I started the videos left out one glaring topic of interest, and that topic is side bending. So I thought I would address that today in this video as I start a new guitar. As a side note, I have finished the construction of the guitar I was going through in the last videos, and I would like to make a video showcasing that instrument when it's done. I'd been hoping that it would be done by now, but we've been socked in the Bay Area for about a month with pretty bad smoke. I've also been working for the census, and so as it's turned out, there hasn't been a day when I have time off, and it's also clear enough that I can spray lacquer outside, which is where I spray since I don't have a spray booth in this little shop. So I haven't been able to do that. I hope that that situation will change soon, and as soon as I'm done with that guitar, I anticipate making a short video featuring it. But in the meantime, I don't see any reason not to start on a new guitar. And so I've spent some time working on a design that I've been kicking around in my head for a little while, and it's going to be some pretty large changes to how I build. Pretty specific, but pretty different. And I will probably make a video detailing that in the near future. For today, the most obvious difference is going to be that this guitar is going to feature Indian rosewood back and sides. I tend to build with a lot of domestic wood. I actually haven't built an Indian rosewood guitar since my first instrument back in 2012. But I do like to change things up now and then, and I'm excited to build this guitar with some Indian rosewood. I'm excited to hear how it's going to sound. It's supposed to be, a really fantastic tone wood. So I'd actually, though, intended not to bend the Indian rosewood for this guitar in my side bending demo, because, well, I don't think bending guitar sides is super challenging. It does require a lot of attention, and making a video can be pretty distracting. However, as some of you may know, LMI sells practice sides. They don't guarantee that they're matching species or matching cuts. They'll just send you two sides of whatever they happen to have available. And I ordered some practice sides to make this demo video, and what I got was two Indian rosewood sides. And it just felt silly to use those as practice sides. There's certainly something more interesting I could do with them than bend them for a demo video. So we're going to go ahead and just bend the Indian rosewood sides that I got for this particular guitar, for this demo. So I wanted to detail a little bit about my bending setup. I've bent with a heating blanket form machine bending sort of setup twice. The first guitar that I built, which was Indian rosewood, I bent in the school that I was going to, Red Rocks Community College, their School of Fine Woodworking. They had machine bending setups for OM guitars. So the first guitar I built, I bent with those. It went great. The second guitar that I tried to build there was mahogany, and the sides failed catastrophically while bending. So then I had to get replacement sides, and I decided to use their electric bending iron, which I did. It was challenging, but the sides came out, they didn't crack. The guitar went well. When it came to the last guitar that I made at Red Rocks, I was actually trying to build a Martin Size O, the first Martin Size O that I'd ever built, and there wasn't a form for their machine to bend the sides on. So it was either make a form or bend on the iron, and I decided to bend on the iron. I haven't looked back. I like it more. It's really versatile. When I set up my own shop, I got a very similar electric heating iron, or electric bending iron, with electric element. And to be honest, I didn't love the iron. It would take a really long time, 45 minutes plus to heat up. It was difficult to regulate the temperature. You can't have it on high, or it'll, for very long, or it'll burn out the heating element. And I was bending a set of sides a couple of years ago, and realized in the middle of the bend that the iron had actually gotten so cold that I could just rest my hand on it. And at that point I decided that I was done with the electric iron and I was going to switch to propane, which actually isn't all that difficult to do. I liked the shape of the electric iron itself. It's sort of a wing shape, it's nice, you get a lot of variety in contour and size. I've got on mine like a real narrow radius bolt-on attachment. So I decided to convert that to propane, which again, really easy. So I will say I take no responsibility if you set up a propane torch in your shop and burn it down. Though I think with a little bit of care and a little attention to common sense, it's a very safe and very effective means of running a bending iron. Mine, I unbolted the base, the electric base, with the dial from the iron itself. I discarded that. I got a 2x4. I pulled the heating element out, obviously. It fits into a sleeve on the inside of the iron, which is really nice actually for other reasons that we'll get into. But I pulled the heating element out. I just cut a hole, basically the shape of the iron, in a 2x4. Bolted the iron to the 2x4. Drilled some holes so I could wire the propane below. I like to bend in this direction rather than bending down towards the ground. And the wire just secures the propane tank and the nozzle. It's wired underneath the nozzle to, in a way that makes it secure. And I will note that I never take this off. I don't want to bend the wire and then have to rebend it to put the tank back on, because that would weaken the wire, and it is the only thing holding it here. So this has not come off since I set this iron up. You shouldn't need to take it off very often. This will be the 7th guitar that I've done with this heating iron and this tank, which includes sides, linings, bindings, some back straps on headstocks, some rosettes, miscellaneous stuff that I've bent on it. The propane lasts a pretty good amount of time. I'm hopeful, but we'll see if it makes it through this guitar as well. I have a backup tank just in case. The tanks are really cheap. So yeah, I think this is the way to go. You should note that I drilled a few holes in the top as a vent so the hot air can get out. And as I was saying about that sleeve that the heating element was formerly in, it's really nice because the torch is aimed at that. So rather than aiming it at a portion of the outside of the pipe and getting a hot spot, it aims in the middle of the pipe and is able to heat it up pretty evenly around the whole thing, which is nice. It also heats up much quicker than the electric element would heat it up, and the temperature control is a lot finer and more responsive in my opinion. It's nice for a thing where if I'm doing binding, say, and I want to bend the binding and also fit it at the same time, I can bend the binding, place it on the guitar, turn the torch off, be entirely focused on fitting the binding on one side of the guitar, and not have to think about this at all. And then I can come back, I can relight it, and in a few minutes it's back up to temperature and I can do the binding on the other side. With the electric element, it would take a long time to get back up to temperature. The pipe doesn't cool off super fast, but the electric element wouldn't heat up very fast either. So yeah, that's I think about it on the setup. It's very simple. The setup of what I want while I'm bending is also laid out here. I have got, let's just flip this so you can see it. I've got my form, obviously. I've got my sides. I haven't soaked the sides. I've a couple times before I started this video wiped them down with some water. Before I bend, I'll do the same thing and try and keep the surfaces wet, but I'm not trying to soak the sides a ton, which is a habit I've gotten into bending other woods. I think it'll be fine with the rosewood. I've also got some clamps to hold the sides in while I'm working. I've got the clamps for the forms as well. I've got a spray bottle that's hanging off my bench. It's nice to have it hanging off the bench. I don't want things that are tall getting in the way. I've got some tea that's tall. I'm going to move it before I bend. And behind that, I've got an absorbent rag that I've dampened down that I'm going to use to wipe the sides down every time I need to get things wet. I've also got a pair of gloves, which is important. You could probably get away without the gloves, but it's nice to just have the gloves. When I bend binding or lining, I often do it without gloves, and just am more careful about not touching the iron. But for the sides, I like it. So I'm going to go ahead and light this, and we're going to wait for it to heat up, and then I'm going to start bending. A note on lighting it, I can either move the torch out just a little bit if I'm having a hard time, and then light it and swing it back, but I would rather actually fit the striker up into the pipe and turn it on and then strike it and pull it back out. If I miss striking it, if I don't get it to ignite, or sometimes the striker will ignite it and then get in the way of the flame and put it out, I want to turn the propane off and let it dissipate for a few seconds, because if I try and light it immediately after this has been running for a few seconds with no flame, I'm just going to get a pipe full of propane exploding in my face, which is no fun. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and light this, and we'll do our waiting and then we'll get started. Another note, I've swept all of the shavings that were on the floor out from under the torch. Clean the floor, don't have any wood shavings hanging out waiting to ignite if something funny happens. That would be an extremely important tip. Okay, so here we are. It's been about 10 minutes and the temperature is looking pretty good. It's a little more heating up to do, but while it goes through that, I wanted to talk a little bit about prepping the sides. So I've got the form top side down. My sides, the face that is eventually going to face the top of the guitar, has, before I even thinned them, I had jointed it flat. And then I have decided how much height I want on the back and set that up. Ordinarily on a guitar, I will glue the blocks in even with the face that's going to be the top, squared out against the table, and I will leave about 6 millimeters on the back, taller than the blocks, taller than I want the guitar to be. The blocks will generally be a few millimeters oversized to account for radiusing. The height dropping is your radius. But the 6 millimeter extra on the back allows me to get the larger dish of the back put in without taking very much at all off of the blocks, which is nice because that makes it more predictable to arrive at the actual dimensions, depth dimensions of the guitar that I want. So when I'm sizing these, I will leave about 6 millimeters beyond what I actually want. Again, for this guitar, a little more complicated. And I will taper it, just a straight taper from the tail block side of the side to the heel block side of the side, and just cut it with a knife and a straight edge. And that's all the prep that goes into it. When I bend these, when you bend your sides, you're going to want to make sure to pay attention to what side of the side you want to be the outside face and which surface is going to be the top, and make sure you're bending it the waist the right direction, bending everything the right direction for what you want it to come out looking like. Now, I think this is probably about ready. It's looking pretty good. So I'm going to wipe this down with some water and I'm going to start bending. I'm also going to remark the top because I've wiped this a few times with water and all of the pencil is starting to disappear. So before we actually start bending the sides of this guitar, I wanted to talk briefly about the mechanics of actually bending the sides. So as I understand it, when you put the wood onto the bending iron, the heat causes the lignin in the wood to become plastic and it allows it to be moldable. And then when it cools back down, it will set into shape. And it's important to both have the temperature that you have the iron at, applying heat to the wood, and the thickness of the wood optimized in order to make it possible. It's nice to heat up the wood around where you want to bend. So especially when doing the waist, you can rock back and forth and you don't want to go too fast and you don't want to go too slow. Sometimes they'll stop. Now, this waist bend on this first side is being a real pain. I don't really feel like giving much at all right now, and so I'm having to be really patient and focus on not forcing the bend. If I was to force it now, it would most likely just break. And I'm also going to pause periodically on most of my bends, but especially on something like this that's being a little bit frustrating and a little slow, to re-wet the surface. As I heat the wood on the bending iron to bend it, I'm essentially causing the wood to lose moisture content. It's evaporating water out of the wood itself. And so while a little surface water isn't going to counteract that completely, it hopefully will buy me a little bit of time, which is important on a bend that doesn't seem to want to give. At the same time, I don't want to make the wood too wet. It's one of the reasons I don't soak sides. It could weaken the bond within the wood. And this can result in, when you're making a bend, rather than the lignin on the outside of the bend stretching to come into shape, the fibers will actually just give and they'll relieve the tension by just tearing apart, and you get grain lift. So in contrast to this first waistband, the second waistband bent super easily the way I would want all waistbands to go. It's just a complete night and day experience. So on this second waistband, I can almost immediately feel the wood of the side wanting to give, and so I feel a little more confident putting some force into the bend early on. And it's noteworthy that while you might think of the waist bend being along a single vertical line, the actual curve is almost always going to be larger than the radius of the iron you're bending on. So I'm moving the side ever so slightly across the pipe to carry the curve across a much wider span than the actual pipe is able to do. And this is a different motion than I use with the bouts, in that I'm still kind of folding along a point rather than moving it, but I can do this because it's such a small area of the bend. And so again, contrasting this with the first waistband, we're like about a minute into actually bending this waist, and we're already basically at a right angle. It's pretty much done. And now I can start bending the lower bout on this side. Now I'm gonna pretty much immediately start to do a little bit of bending, but mostly at this point I'm focused on preheating the wood along the length of the bout. It's not like the waist where I can just set it and I'm bending a small area so it'll heat it up without moving. I need to really get the whole bout heated because I want to bend the whole bout as one piece in order to arrive at a smooth curve. I'm also really careful to have a hold of the side on both sides and to be not reaching beyond the waist or using the waist too much, because at this point I can still easily unfold that waist bend. Basically throughout the rest of this bending process it's super easy to unfold that waist bend. It's not fully set. So I want to be careful where I grab around the waist. It's also really important, I think, to focus on using your entire body when you're bending the bouts. You really need to maintain the curve across the entire bout as you're bending, because it's going to want to spring back to a flat shape. And the bending is just going to go a lot faster if you can keep it from doing that spring back. And of course you want it to go quickly because the wood is just going to get drier and more brittle, and it's going to get harder to bend the longer you take. And so I think that this is really like the physical challenge of bending the sides, is this having to do the bending and also hold things in place when you're doing the bouts. And you'll also notice that while I'm bending, I'm keeping the bout, the side in motion across the pipe. I'm actually trying to only actively bend while I'm sliding. I don't want to, like on the waist, sort of bend around a focal point, because that's going to tend to result in lumps in the side. And I will sometimes just have to resort to doing that to get, especially in the upper bout, it to match in a specific place. But generally I want to avoid it because those lumps can be really difficult to get out. And so, of course, when I have to do it, I also want to be really careful that I'm not bending too far or creating a lump that doesn't match, a bend that doesn't match the actual shape of the form. I can get rid of those, but it's a lot more difficult. So this is actually bending the lower bout on the first side, and again, as you can see, it really involves my whole body. Actually, one of the reasons I like bending with the pipe upright is because I can basically just walk around the pipe while I'm bending, and I'm holding the curve in the side, and as I slide it across the pipe, I'm slowly increasing the radius and also keeping it from springing back out. It is, however, taking a fair amount of muscle, probably more muscle than I actually want it to take, which I'll talk about later. So once I've finished the waist and the lower bout bend, the last thing I need to do is to bend the upper bout. I think this is arguably the hardest bend on a guitar on the sides. It's a lot tighter than the lower bout. But unlike the waist, it still requires you to carry the bend across a pretty large span of the side. It's also, for this body shape, noticeably less symmetrical than other bends. It's tight in spots, it's really a subtle curve in other spots, and it's important to get those to get those curves relation to each other accurate. It also is difficult when bending the upper bout to stick to the rule of not reaching across the waist. Here you'll notice that I'm completely on the other side of the waist to do this bend. And so I'm actually using my hand and my finger on the lower bout to leverage the lower bout, so that the waist joint is being pressed to close as opposed to open, and in that way trying to keep from unbending the waist. But in my experience, it's often hard to not mess with the waist somewhat while bending the upper bout. It's important to try not to do it very much, though. Also of note, when you're on the other side of the waist, when you're on the lower bout side of the waist, and you're doing the leveraging to try and push the waist closed, to try and keep it from folding out as you bend the side, it's important not to put too much pressure on the waist, because you wouldn't want to snap it. So it's sort of a delicate balance. It's hard to describe. It's really more of a thing you have to feel. It doesn't describe easily in words what I'm doing, but I'm just being cognizant that I don't want to mess up the waist too much. Here you can see that I'm going back. I've unbent the waist a little bit, and I need to go back and make it tighter. It's important to keep an eye on this, because if I were to just keep going and bend the upper bout to fit, but the waist no longer fit, then I would put it in the form, and it wouldn't work. I'd have to go back and rebend the waist, and then that would affect the curve of the upper bout and how it fits in the form, and so then I'd have to go back and tweak that. So you want to keep an eye on that as you're bending, to make sure you're not getting too far out, and to correct problems as they arise. So as I mentioned earlier, while most of the time I'm trying to do bout bends using a smooth motion and keeping the side in motion across the pipe while I'm doing the bend, sometimes for tighter curves, for difficult spots, I will bend a portion of the bout, especially the upper bout, more like I do the waist, kind of bending across a single vertical line on the side. I generally try not to bend anywhere near as drastically as the waist. It's important to work slowly, controlled bend, not go too far. It's not anywhere near as tight of a bend as the waist, and then to immediately smooth out that curve, using the normal technique of bending as you slide across the pipe, so that you can avoid any lumpiness. You also notice as I pulled that off that it seemed like it was bent pretty far beyond. You can use spring back, the tendency of the wood to still want to return to your advantage. At this point, it's easy to bend that tight portion into place, and to then use the spring back to set things in the form more perfectly, and then you can go back and tweak it as I'm doing here to get everything exact. Okay, so the sides are all bent, and as you can see, see, it's not too bad. I struggled a little bit with these. I had to kind of muscle them into shape a little more than I normally would. I left them a little bit thicker, about 2.1 millimeters. Normally I would get closer to 1.9 to 2, which was probably part of it. It also could be that, I bent the first waist and it was a much bigger struggle than bending the second waist. And I think the iron was a little bit warmer when I bent the second waist than the first. So patience is your friend, and thermometers, some way to tell the temperature of the iron more accurately, it could also be your friend even if it's not mine. But the most important thing is just patience and not getting in a hurry. If something isn't bending, it's better, you gotta know and have that feel of how much you can force it and how much you just have to let the heat do the job and be patient. So while I'm bending the sides, I get one done and it's got to sit here, and I don't want it to just sit out in the open. So I'm using the cam clamps to keep everything in the form while I'm bending, but as soon as the bending is over, I'm going to put the spreaders in, and I've got some little blocks. They're not like, this isn't one of them, but they're like this. They're all the same height, so I can put them under the form. I generally will clamp the waist with the spreader first and then work out from there. I want to make sure that the top is again facing down and the top of my bench is basically flat. I want to register the top face of the sides against the bench all around. Work out from the center. You want to pay attention to whether or not you have smooth curves all around the side, which you should. If for some reason something's glaringly not looking smooth, not looking good, you can always go back and bend it a little bit more, tweak it to get it into shape. Once this is all clamped up, I'm going to let it sit for a day or two, and it's basically going to set into this form, which I could still go back and tweak it in the future, but I'd rather personally just do it right now. The iron's out, everything's set up and it's ready. But this is looking good. I've got a few of the cam clamps still, taking out little spots. Spreaders don't spread everything, and I'd rather overbend than underbend. So this one is making a little smoothing of the curve here where the side wants to kick in further, which again should set pretty much up against the side overnight. And this is holding these overlaps together. When it's all done setting, I'm going to be able to pull the sides out, and I will cut the overlaps off so that the sides are going to butt up against each other nicely. And at that point, I'm going to be able to glue in the blocks, and we will be right back where I was when I started this series of videos with the last guitar. I will probably make some videos about this guitar as I build it. I'm not 100% sure what I want to feature, but if there's anything that you've been dying to see, you can definitely let me know in the comments below, or shoot me an email or something. And yeah, if you're interested in learning more about guitar building, or seeing more of my work, you can of course subscribe to this channel and check out my other videos, and then you'll be able to see new videos as they come out. You can also follow the link in the description to my website, where you can see some finished guitars and learn a little bit about workshops that I offer in guitar building. Yeah, I want to thank you for watching. I hope everyone's staying safe and healthy. If you're on the West Coast, I hope that you're staying out of the smoke as much as you can. Hopefully it'll clear up for all of us here pretty soon. Thanks for watching. Till next time.